You didn't read what you fucking Googled. You goddamn moron. You didn't read what you fucking Googled. Every fucking conservative acts like this fucking shit every time they're on my fucking stuff. It was the first question I asked you. What have Republicans done to help life after birth? That's what I'm looking for. Not what they might have wanted to do.
What you've done, though, is said, well, it doesn't matter. You're not really asking what they've done. You're asking what specific laws have been enacted or to supplement that have been expanded. That's what you're really asking.
Yeah, because that's what politicians do. Wait, hold on. You wouldn't say that Democrats got the Green New Deal in place, right? Because it was just proposed? So if I say to you right now, the Democrats got the Green New Deal done, would you not be confused by the fact that it wasn't passed?
Right, but this is not an analogous or comparable situation. What you're saying is that Republicans don't care about babies once they're born because
because they don't do anything
you
about
shifted
it.
on this, but you will argue that you didn't, because they haven't actually enacted laws that you think demonstrate a commitment to life after birth.
Yeah, that I believe, and yes, and I believe what I think can be demonstrated.
What politicians are supposed to do.
Yes.
And absent that, then they're not really doing anything.
Correct.
And I would agree to some extent.
That is their job to do that.
Laws. Yeah. But on the other hand, I would also argue that enacting a law, right, notwithstanding the president signing it, right, even getting a law passed, right, is a whole bunch of sausage making. And that you can't question somebody's motives or commitment to wanting to support and supporting life after birth because a specific law or set of laws was not enacted.
I absolutely can. Why not? Because they're effective at pushing different policy. Why can't they be effective at pushing something that Democrats are effective at pushing? As little as they do, because I will argue that Democrats do not push it as often as I would like them to.
Okay, well then let's do this then. So am I right then to argue there was the Born Alive Act that I linked to earlier, that protects abortion survivors, right? Babies that survive an abortion, right? And this followed on the heels of Kermit Gosnell, and there's a whole movie about him killing hundreds of babies and many of them after they were born alive, right? Just leaving them to be discarded on a tray and die over in a corner. Okay, so Born Alive Act is proposed by Republicans in Congress. 48 Democratic senators opposed it, actually filibustered it. Would you then agree with me? Democrats are not interested in protecting babies that are born alive after a botched abortion.
So in this instance, based on what you linked me and what I read from an actual reputable source, I don't know what you're referring to. I would not agree with this, because the response to this was a bill that was proposed that was protecting women from getting prosecuted as a result of babies dying after birth. So the example that they gave, I'm not sure if you were here while that was happening, but a mother dying or driving in a car recklessly, right? Driving in a car recklessly and negligently, albeit, getting in a car crash while pregnant could be charged with murder or manslaughter, and that they wanted to push a bill that said that wouldn't necessarily be the case. Or like if they had taken some kind of they had alcohol or something like that, too much alcohol, and it resulted in the kid dying after birth, that they shouldn't be able to be prosecuted for murder or manslaughter.
That's what you're saying. That was one specific component of the law. The primary intent of the law, which is why what you were referring to here is buried down in like subsection C of this thing. But nonetheless,
no, it said that was the whole bill. That was
no, it wasn't the whole bill, because the whole bill actually starts off with degree of care required, immediate admission to a hospital. The point of the bill is that an infant born alive after an abortion, right, is entitled to all protections of laws, and in addition, that any healthcare practitioner, right, must exercise the same degree of skill, care, and diligence to preserve the life and health of the child, right, as they would for any other patient. That's why this law was passed, to ensure that babies that were born alive after an abortion actually were cared for and not just set aside on a tray over in the corner or in a closet, which this bill arose from these specific instances. Okay, that one component of it means that the mother may not be prosecuted under this section. That's a component of the law. The thrust of the law, though, is protecting babies. It is ensuring they get proper health care once they are born. Right. So my question again, then: 48 Democratic senators filibustered and opposed this law, in addition to a whole bunch of other activist groups and interest groups out there who opposed it as well. But these 48 filibustered and opposed it. Using your rationale, your logic, your approach to this, I could reasonably say then, you know what? Democrats just don't care about babies once they're born. They actually support negligence in caring for those babies once they're born, and advocate and support allowing them to die over in the corner unattended to.
So here's my problem. So here's my problem. You can use, because I agree, you can use the framework of my logic in whatever way that you would like, because it all comes down to the knowledge that we have with the understanding of what it means for care after a child is born. I would have to read the bill specifically you were referring to, so I feel like that's beside the point. What we're referring to primarily is after they are born. And what I was very specific about was the care that they receive after they're born, not necessarily medical care that they receive immediately after they're born. And I can agree that I would like children to have medical care, if needed, immediately after they were born. But again, I haven't seen the bill specifically you're talking to, so I can't specifically talk about it because we're having a disagreement. I thought I saw the bill. You're saying I didn't see the bill. So let's just, unless we want to do a reading stream for the next hour, let's just agree to move beyond that. Beyond that, right? We can talk about, again, the child tax credits, there's the tax benefits in general, as well as like free lunches was a big one that Republicans were not super happy with in comparison to Democrats. Free school meals and things like that, social welfare in general, giving money to parents, single parents, and things like that Republicans quite universally do not like in comparison to Democrats. All of these things, I think, are sufficient evidence to show that Republicans do not have a good regard, or do not care very much about life after birth. That after you are born, they will not provide you money, resources, or tools for you to be able to properly live your life in the circumstances that would necessarily arise out of abortion being illegal, such as single mother households.
Can we stop there for a sec?
Yeah, of course.
So school lunches, right? Republicans oppose the federal government being at all involved in the provision of school lunches, and rightfully so. I mean, just like Republicans generally would argue, we ought not to have a Department of Education. The federal government just doesn't have a proper role in K through 12 public education. But on the other hand, Republicans at the state level, right? They do advocate for school lunch programs at the state level to be paid for through local taxes and state taxes. All right.
Can I respond to that?
Scope of,
or would you? Okay.
Just one sec. Go. Arguing about the scope of authority of the federal government is not an indication whether or not people like babies, want to care for babies, or care for children, or otherwise.
Okay, so I disagree. And the reason why is because when we're talking about rights that may be enshrined, or privileges that might be enshrined to people over a federal landscape, or over the entire nation, why are we prioritizing things like free school lunches, which are of very little to no consequence as to whether or not it falls under the state's authority, in comparison to more pressing problems like economic issues? If what you're trying to say to me is the only thing that they really care about is whether or not it's federal or not. Well, no, what they care about is they don't want to give free school lunches in specific areas. That's what they want to do. They don't want just the right. They want to avoid paying for free school lunches inside of certain jurisdictions. It's not just because it's federal and doesn't belong to the state. It's the same exact thing that we saw with abortion. Do you really think that most Republicans just want to avoid it being federally ubiquitous as to the legal nature of abortions? Or do you think that it's primarily the areas in which the Republicans reside, in which they want to make abortion not legal, that they are doing it? It is obviously not only have we objectively seen right now, actively happening, all of these areas that these Republicans were pushing for abortion to be made illegal, or at least not federally legal, these people are making it illegal in their local areas for you to be committing to acts of abortion. So I find that to be unsatisfactory.
Can
The
I address
idea,
those 2 points?
yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So it is important, right? So, and this is where we get into the ideological differences between Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, right? Is how we view the government and the role of government in our lives, right? Democrats see government as a tool to enact all sorts of things that they believe are favorable to human beings. Fair enough, no problem. Republicans, though, have a strong sense of where the authority to do these things for human beings ought to be exercised. And therefore, it is a legitimate argument on our side to argue whether or not the federal government, one, has a role, an authority to do something, or it does not. And that is an argument that it occurs regardless of the subject matter, regardless of the policy questions at hand. All right. So, to your question about abortion, now granted, uh, I think abortion is an exceptional issue because of the high levels of ignorance around it, where you conflate Roe and the judicial rightness of Roe and its companion cases versus the abortion issue itself, the act of aborting a child. Those two things get conflated way too often and just kind of pervert the whole conversation around whether or not, one, the court should have ever decided Roe as it did, right, as a constitutional exercise of its authority, or it should not have, right? Now, the fact that the states, right, now empowered because we've abandoned Roe, we've reversed Roe. Now the states are empowered to legislate in the specific area of abortion. This doesn't reflect some um, jurisdiction-specific preference, right? The Republicans aren't arguing about providing school lunches to inner city kids versus suburban kids, right? No, the Republicans are arguing whether or not people from across the country should be taxed in Texas to pay for school lunches in Massachusetts. Right? And whether the federal government ought to be extracting that money from people in Texas to pay for something in Massachusetts. That's a legitimate argument that has nothing to do with the rightness or wrongness of providing school lunches.
Well,
Okay?
for half of these places, you understand the school systems are getting their you understand their school systems are getting their funding for a lot of their programs locally through property taxes, right?
Of course they are. Yeah.
Okay, so
Whether
why
it's
are you
sales taxes,
saying
property taxes, or otherwise, yeah.
okay, so then why are you saying that for these federal programs that you're paying it for? Do you think that like because we have federal guidelines for education, that means every place in the country pays for everyone else's education?
No, but when the federal government disperses dollars, right, from the general fund to states, you literally are having dollars from Texas paying for something somewhere else.
I legitimately don't know how often federal funds are used for local lunches for schools. Is it not through their municipalities? I'm pretty
Well,
sure
the
it's through
federal
the
government,
municipality.
well, about every dollar of money that goes to paying for K through 12 education in America, about 8 cents comes from the federal government. So about 8%, right? So that money, since money is fungible, money is being dispersed for a whole wide variety of things from the federal government, whether it's for curriculum development, whether it's for school personnel resources, whether it's for technology
Yeah.
expansion and improvement, and school lunches.
So so then you're arguing for a fraction of 8% then.
Oh, no, no, no. That's regardless of how much, right? Because in every instance where federal dollars are being used to pay for something, right? A dollar from Washington State is being paid for 40 cents of something in Virginia. I mean, the point is not that we're arguing about fractions of a dollar here. Your point, right, was by at the national level, Republicans opposing the federal government paying for school lunches at the K through 12 public school level, that they're demonstrating a lack of commitment to life after birth. I'm disagreeing with you because that is an argument about the scope of federal responsibility and authority,
I don't
whereas at the state level, Republicans are actually supporting
So I don't think it is.
School-provided lunches.
And the reason why is because if it was, you would pick something more significant. You'd pick something.
School lunches.
So yeah, the reason. Yes, the reason. No, I'm saying you would pick, as in the Republicans would pick something more significant, not something that's a fraction of an 8% drop inside of that thing. Not a fraction. And by the way, we're talking about a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of 8%. When we're talking about how much.
I keep telling you that Republicans at the state level are not proposing to reduce the availability of school lunches.
No, what I'm saying to you, though, is the expansion of school lunches and school programs and stuff like this, they're either being gutted by Republicans or they're not being supported by Republicans when we're talking about the expansion of these things. That's what I'm telling you. I'd love to see some
examples of that. I mean,
okay.
Now it sounds like we're talking in some highly abstract context where, in Missouri 4 years ago, there was, a state bill to expand free school lunches or something? I mean,
we could talk about any host of things. We could talk about the child care and stuff like that comes from various different proposed programs from the Democrats, and we could talk about any of these things.
Doesn't matter, right?
Well, the reason they're in regards to what we were talking about previously. I'm not trying to use what is proposed by the Democrats as being an example of the Democrats being good. What I'm using that as an example of is Republicans laser focusing on specifically childcare when in their rhetoric and things that they're saying is that you should be responsible for your kid. And so these are the reasons why they're striking down these things is you should be responsible for your children. You should be responsible for how, you raise them.
I don't see us striking down these things, though. I don't see this wave of child-centric laws across the country being struck down.
So then, in the hopes of avoiding getting into just a Google battle back and forth,
No, I hear you. I mean, I'm generally interested in this narrative because it's regularly trotted out.
So then let's do this back and forth. Which party do you think has been responsible for passing more legislation that provides child tax credits and gets single mother welfare, child welfare in general, foster care funding, orphanage funding, things like that? Which political party has passed more legislation in regards to funding and support for those programs, Planned Parenthood, things like those? Which one has passed more funding and support for those groups?
I don't know. I mean,
really?
I'm not. Now we're relying on what you're doing here is you're relying on a set of presumptions based on inferences based on past history of behavior.
Okay, so then let's break this down because I worry we might not be being intellectually honest. Which political party do you think supports Planned Parenthood more? The Democratic Party or the Republican Party?
Repeat the second part, I'm sorry.
Which party supports Planned Parenthood more financially and systematically?
Planned Parenthood performs the most abortions across the country. How are they reflective of a commitment to human life?
Do you know what else? Do you know what else Planned Parenthood does? It gives medical procedures to people that cannot afford it, not just abortions. They provide individuals
a minority of their activity is devoted to that. In fact, they don't even provide mammograms, despite repeatedly saying they do. But nonetheless, wait a sec. Are you really suggesting that support for Planned Parenthood, right, demonstrates a sufficient commitment to life after birth?
It is one of them.
No,
absolutely.
Because like you just said, they're providing health care. Republicans support the 10,000 community health centers across the country.
Do you know how many Planned? Wait, hold on. Wait, do you want to know how many?
So why not use that?
Okay, we can use whatever you like, but then I'm just going to count. We can do this back and forth. Do you know how many Planned Parenthoods are around the world? Do you know how, or around the United States? Do you know how many various different charities? Do you know how many various charities that Democrats support for worker strikes, worker unions, individual single parent funds?
We're no longer talking about babies and children now.
So so then let's talk. Well, the reason you just gave me a nebulous charity. You didn't just give me a specific children's charity.
These are federal community health care centers. These are federally funded community health centers.
Wait, if they're federally funded, I'm paying for them. What do you mean? How is that a Republican thing? I'm paying for them then. Why would you use a federally funded thing?
I'm saying you don't see Republicans trying to gut these things.
Wait, I'm not saying that Republicans
are trying to gut these things across the country.
I'm not saying Republicans are trying to gut literally every single thing that helps a kid at all.
Oh, well, so it's only some things, and because it's some
Yes.
things, then they have no
Yes.
commitment?
Yes, there is. Yeah, child tax credits,
No, then that's
maternity
just an
leave, and
asinine way of looking at this.
how? There's very specific, very critically needed things. Like, hold on, maybe we can start because I don't want to get into like Bill 6382, and I want to get to that point where we're just doing a Google fight and trying to figure out who is this. Which political party do you think supports welfare disproportionately?
Supports welfare in what way? What do you? What are we
Let's
talking
go
about here?
single parent welfare.
I don't see Republicans trying to reverse or repeal existing laws
That's
there.
not what I
I do
asked
see
you.
Republicans trying
Hold on.
to slow down the rate in the increase of spending on welfare programs.
Okay.
That's nothing like trying to repeal these programs or gut them, to use your word. So what are we really talking
Again,
about?
this is very clever. That's not what I asked you. Which party is pushing, advocating for, passing more legislation that advocates for like single parent programs, like so that will enable single parents to be able to afford having a kid?
Republicans are pushing those kinds of laws that include work requirements. Democrats aren't. There's
Okay,
a fundamental
so,
difference.
hold on.
Go ahead.
So are you intellectual? Do you believe you're being intellectually honest when you're trying to say to me that Republicans and Democrats are both pushing the same welfare-based, like single-parent welfare programs at the same rate? You believe that?
I'm not actually arguing this.
Okay, so that's been my.
You're
I've
trying
asked
to
you
create
three.
this-
I've asked you
You're
three
trying
different
to
times
invent
a
this
simple question.
context where one party is more active in
It's-
expanding
so
something,
it's-
and
it's
that is what tells us whether or not Republicans are committed to life after birth.
it's
That's
because-
just a nonsense argument.
No, it's because I live in America. I live in the real world. I know that political parties have very specific things that they push to their political bases. Like I could tell you, Democrats are overwhelmingly disproportionately pushing against gun or for gun legislation in sort of the United States, and Republicans are overwhelmingly pushing against it. I can actually give you that answer, but it feels like every time I ask you about this specific thing, you are not able to give me a similar answer. You're trying to say, well, technically, your response would be something like this in me responding to the gun
No.
legislation.
So let
Well,
me try
technically,
again then, Billy.
Democrats are actively trying to put restrictions on what the Republicans have restrictions on when it comes to gun legislation. That's not what I asked. The simple question I asked was, which political party pushes for more welfare of parents of kids? Which political party does that?
I don't know.
In earnest, you are saying you do not know.
No, because right now, again, what you're trying to do is rely on a supposition or implication that because one party is promising to do all sorts of shit because they're politicians, which was something that you appealed to earlier, you're trying to then argue that one party is not sufficiently devoted to X. And that's just a nonsense argument. It's just nonsense. Let's go back to your gun example, right? Even though Republicans are pushing back against Democratic proposals at the national level for gun restrictions, they do so because we've seen these measures to be ineffective at reducing gun crimes.
This is
But
just
what
not
you would
true.
say, what you would say is, oh, wait a second now. That means that Republicans are just in favor of more people getting killed by guns.
I never said
And that's
that.
bullshit. That's an idiot. No. I'm saying using your logic, that's where you would arrive.
No, my
That
logic would
Republicans
say
don't sufficiently value life
just to be
to enact more gun protections.
just to be correct.
restrictions.
My argument would be that they would be apathetic or complacent. That would be my argument, and I personally believe that. I believe there are many Republicans that are complacent with the amount of people that currently die inside of the United States. They think it is justifiable and okay.
What?
And that is true. Yes.
Based on what?
Based on
What
their
do you
lack of
deduce this
ability,
from?
based on their lack of desire to do anything. Hold on.
Wait, no.
Hold on, hold on. Then let
To
me
do
ask you.
anything,
Then let
the
me.
same
Then,
thing
yeah.
you're
Then,
doing with kids.
then no. Then let me
They
ask
need
you.
to do
Excuse.
anything.
Let me ask you this question. Somebody
I got
that does
excited
it.
there, my
So
bad.
yeah. Somebody that is saying that recognizes all of the gun problems that we have, all of the the killings that we see with guns, that refuses to pass any legislation, how can you not say that that person finds that the amount of gun violence that is happening to be satisfactory or okay if they refuse to do anything about it? Why would I care about you saying, oh, yeah, gun violence is bad if you do nothing about it? I don't care. You're a loser. I don't care. You're a degenerate. I don't give a fuck. Right? If you want to say that, that's fine. If you want to own that position, that is, hold on, excuse me, because maybe you're missing some context. Because I am personally of the position that I'm for guns. I'm cool with guns, right? I believe there is a certain amount of deaths that will be expected as a result of this position. There will be an amount of people that I will have to go, this is an okay amount of people dying per year to gun violence, and I think this is satisfactory. There is going to have to be that point as a recognition of me being in any way pro-gun. This must be the case, right? In order for you to be pro-gun at all. If you do not think that is the case, you do not understand your position, and I'm sorry, you need to go do some reading or thinking on your own. If there is going to be guns inside of an area, there will be shootings, there will be killings, there will be murders, and you must cope and deal with a certain level of that before you begin with your advocacy. I am recognizing that. But the problem is there are Republicans that say we are currently at a point that is satisfactory as a result of them not wanting to do anything about gun reform and them not wanting to do anything about background checks, them not wanting to do anything in regards to that would actually lower the rate of homicide with firearms. You understand that, right?
Can we stop there for a sec?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, thanks. I appreciate that. I appreciate you trying to correct what I was trying to impute to you. Look, I also agree with you that the presence of firearms always means there will be gun-related violence, whether it's murders or robbery, whatever. Okay, we've established that. I think what you're doing is not reasonable or rational in saying that, okay, look, because Republicans oppose expanded background checks, because we've demonstrated that background checks are not preventing existing gun violence. Right? We know this as a fact, right?
But that's not true. Oh, sorry. Continue. Excuse me.
That opposing expanded background checks, right, it does not demonstrate that Republicans somehow don't care about the number of incidents or don't want to try to reduce the number of incidents, right? The expand and to your point that that look, enacting new laws to reduce the number of incidents. The problem is that your supposition, and it's merely supposition, is that these additional laws will reduce the incidence of these things, and we don't know that. And we don't know that precisely because we see a lot of what's being proposed in Congress has already been enacted at the state level, and what we see at the state level is no reduction in gun-related crimes or violence or murders or anything else related to firearms. So Republicans then rightly say, well, look, why layer from the national government onto the states yet another layer of bureaucratic momentum and regulatory requirements and standards when it's not working at the state level? That doesn't display a uncare or a dispassionate or disinterest view of gun violence and the victims of gun violence. No, it's actually questioning the efficacy of the public policy.
Okay, can I respond to that?
Please.
Okay, so first things first, it's not about whether or not I think you are implying some level of condemnation that is there that is not. My condemnation is reserved exclusively for losers and degenerates, and I will say that always. They are degenerates to society who try and say that they care about the victims of gun violence but refuse to do anything about it when it comes to looking into the efficacy of any of these things. That's who I believe are the degenerates.
Okay, I need to stop you right there one sec. Because you just pivoted to looking into something.
No, okay, no.
Wait a second.
So you need to finish. You need to let me. You need to let me finish my
enacting laws.
Yes, I know, and so you need to let me finish. You need to let me finish my thought. So these individuals are degenerates. Those are the people I was referring to. The reason why I brought those people up specifically is because I think when you heard me say losers and degenerates, you thought I meant anybody who was not passing laws. That's not what I believe.
No, I didn't. But
okay, so then I don't understand our problem here. What I just said, and that was the spiel that I went on. If you think that we are at a level where in which we cannot pass any laws that will realistically lower the rates of gun violence inside the United States of America, then that so be it. You just don't. It is to your knowledge that is currently not the case, right? You're not a degenerate in my eyes. As I've stated, there is going to be a level that we get to that is that. At worst, I might call you dumb. Because I'm personally of the opinion, and I've seen information alluding to the idea that background checks would actually prevent some shootings, not all shootings, not nearly all shootings, but some shootings, particularly mass shootings, of people prior to it occurring. So it would be preventative in nature for some of these people. I'm not going to make a claim of a deterrent because I believe the information on that is still out. But I believe that to be the case. If you are taking that position, that you think that this is a sufficient amount of laws for the amount of guns in the United States, you believe this is the amount of guns necessary to be able to prevent tyranny or whatever the basis with which you have for our Second Amendment right, then so be it. You can own that position. But I think the degenerates are the people who are actively saying that they want to reduce the rates of people dying from gun violence who do absolutely nothing about it, who don't go to the voting booths about it, who don't look into any of these problems. Those are the people that I think are degenerates, not the people who are like, yep, you know what? I've looked into it. Doesn't seem like there's sufficient evidence to show any of this stuff can actually lower the rates of it. So it is what it is, but this is the rate that it is. I hope it gets better. That's a separate group, even if I think that they are ignorant to it. But just to be clear, it feels like every single time I talk about any problem that Republicans are having, you're just assuming that I am making the claim that Democrats are morally superior on the given topic. Again, not everyone has to be, for the most part, I'd say I disagree with the Democratic Party, who's probably pretty firmly anti-gun. I would say I'm in opposition to the Democratic Party there, and I don't think they're like morally superior on this issue, but it feels like that's what you're constantly appealing to in regards to
No, not at all. I could care less. I could care less about the comparison between Democrats and Republicans and who's better than who. What I was taking issue with, as you noticed from my very first comment, was what I think is a false narrative about Republicans and whether or not they care about children, and you focused your point far more narrowly than what I heard you initially say, which is, you think Republicans don't care because they're not actually enacting laws at the national level, to which we can argue about the reasonableness of that kind of test, but which also I think you need to accept the fact, the reality that even without passing laws at the federal level, Republicans are not reversing or repealing existing laws at the federal level. They are proposing their own laws. They are proposing expansions of existing laws, and they are active at the state level where they think, where people like me think most of the work should be done, not from DC, not from worthless politicians in DC, and they're equally worthless bureaucrats that are also in DC and vicinity.
I don't know. I just haven't seen very much legislation coming from Republicans, even on the state level. Maybe it exists, but based on all of the visuals that I see, it seems like blue states are the ones that put up the most effort to restrict the sale distribution.
How do you know that, for example? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I didn't let you finish your point. Were you talking about guns?
So, yeah, based on the...
I'm sorry. You were shifting, and I didn't let you get to
So, hold on. So, no, I mean, we can... No, that's fine. We can just get there.